Hello everybody, my name is Roxtus.
And I'm Soulgale.
And welcome back to Warframe.
Woo.
Wow, you ready?
I'm ready.
Alrighty, Excalibur How To. Wow. So, as per the Trinity video, if you watch back over that one, you'll actually notice that I never incidentally called out where to get Trinity's parts. So, here we are, and we're going to show where to get those parts. So, Trinity is actually off of Pluto, off of Hades, doing the Ambulus boss fight. Now this is pretty interesting. You get all of her parts from this boss fight. You get her neuroptics, chassis, and her systems, and then you can get the rest of her parts from the market. Going in there, just type in Trinity, and you'll be able to pop it up and be able to get her main blueprint. How is this significant to Excalibur? Well, since the vanilla of the game, or basically the beta and afterwards the alpha of the game, Excalibur has always since dropped from the Ambulus. And this is interesting that vanilla, he actually dropped from Arm Etina. I believe that's how you say that, is Arm Etina. And then it evolved. Of course, Arm Etina was actually a MOA, and then it evolved to basically being what it is now, which is the Ambulus. And then over time, they switch-swapped the bosses around, and now Excalibur is now dropped on War via Lieutenant Krill. So this is kind of interesting, but I just kind of want to go over this, especially when you're trying to look for Excalibur and or if you're trying to look for Trinity, is when you're doing a regular boss run, and this is just on farming times, Ambulus takes a good 8 minutes to go through the entire boss fight. I believe it takes like a full minute for the game to, or for whatever his name is from the Corpus ship to come by and pick up the Ambulus. So it takes a good amount of time. I believe it's like a minute, or if not 90 seconds. And throughout that time, you're just sitting there waiting for all the Ambuluses to get picked up to be able to just leave the mission, to be able to get at least one of Trinity's parts. So trying to just get one part, going through the mission and completing the mission once, takes from 8 to 10 minutes, depending on your loading times. This is just annoying across the board, because even for Excalibur currently, if you go into War, you can do Lieutenant Krill in 2 minutes, 4 times less time, from 2 to 8 minutes. So that's significant when you're taking a look at Excalibur. And then when you're looking at Phobos, for someone like Mag, when you're doing the Sergeant for Iliad, you can literally walk in, slit the Sergeant's throat, and walk out of the mission in 1 minute, less than 1 minute. So this is really annoying, especially if you're trying to go for Trinity, because it takes forever to get through the boss fight. So I see this more so as a boss problem, especially when you're trying to look for Excalibur, him being in an unoriginal spot where, you know, right now he's not dropped by his boss. So that is kind of annoying, especially if you've known the history of Warframe. He always used to be dropped by the Ambulus. So this is just kind of a little bit of a boss issue here. I wish that it was actually redropped by the Ambulus and it had some of its significance back. But that is what it is for that. You can get all of Excalibur's parts via Lieutenant Krill, his neuroptics, chassis, and systems. And if you go into the market and you type in Excalibur, you will find Excalibur here, and you'll be able to get his main blueprint. So you'll be able to build Excalibur. Ah, yes. And for Excalibur, he's a pretty good one. He is a pretty good, you know, he's got his blade out and he just radiantly blinds everyone with just his radiance. But other than that, I would just say for the actual Warframe in itself, it kind of loses its luster, if you know what I mean. Shall we take a look at the abilities?
We shall.
Alrighty, so I'm actually going to be using the Codex because I don't want you guys to get confused between the different variants of Excalibur. So, we've got his passive. Excalibur deals 10% increased damage and it attacks 10% quicker when wielding any basic type of sword. So this could be a Skana, this could be Nakana. I believe it's just any basic variant of a sword. It can't be a great sword, or it can't be a larger type of sword. It's just any basic sword he basically wields with a proficiency, with a master class of proficiency with those basic swords. So that's pretty interesting. It just adds a little bit more damage and it adds a little bit more attack speed, but other than that, it's pretty much the same. Slash dash. Slash and dash through enemies alongside a radial specter. The powerful exalted blade slashes inflicts a bleed status. So this, you just basically dash in a line and it'll chain between different opponents. The drain is 25 energy. The range for this ability from the start of the dash until the end of the dash is 20 meters. And the chain range, the amount of range it can actually chain between units is 7 meters. And this just plays out throughout the entire 20 meters. So it'll just keep on chaining or latching onto different units, even if it's in a zigzag, and it'll be able to deal slash dashes damage to those people. The damage on a base is 75 slash damage. I believe this is actually 250 if I'm looking at this right. Is this right? Is this right, DE? Is this right? Should be actually 250. It's 250 on a base. I don't know why the codex is wrong, but it's 250 on a base, and the chain range is 7 meters. So again, kind of annoying. Codex says something completely different than what's actually in the ability. This is the same thing, I believe, even with Saran. Saran or someone else has the same issue for the invulnerability. There's some weird things going on with the codex. I don't know what that is, but the damage is not 75. It is 250 on a base. Now, this is a really interesting ability because when you're looking at that slash damage, how is this calculated and how is this affected by any mods? Well, it takes your base damage, which is 250, and then it multiplies it by your ability strength. As per usual with any ability, it will be multiplied by how much power strength you actually have, and then it'll also be multiplied by any elemental mods that you have. So if you have something like Fever Strike that deals toxic damage, it'll also multiply by that mod as well, depending on which weapon you have it equipped on. It'll also multiply it by any damage modifiers that you have, such as primed pressure point or basic pressure point. In that stead, you'll be able to multiply by any damage type mods, and it's also multiplicative with combo counter. This is the same thing as if you have watched Ash's video. His ultimate is based upon combo counter. So for every point that you have into your combo counter, it'll also add an additional 25% or 25% bonus damage multiplied through to 3.75 times damage multiplier, depending on your melee weapon. Again, if you have the Venka, this will go from 3.75 times to a 4 times damage multiplier because the Venka possesses a 1 bonus added combo multiplier tier. So just for that case, you can get from 3.75 to 4 times multiplier. This is really good because of that combo multiplier. This just makes it so that the damage goes up even higher than it usually is. And again, based upon what actual melee mods you have on. So this is dependent upon your melee mods. So if you do not have your Exalted Blade out and you just have your basic melee weapon, it'll base the multipliers based upon what is actually on your basic weapon. So if you have primed Fever Strike and primed Pressure Point here, it'll apply all those mods to that ability. And then if you pulled out your Exalted Blade, instead of being off of your Broken War, it will apply any mods that are in here. So it'll apply your Sacrificial Pressure or any of your other elemental type mods. Whatever mods are on that specific weapon, it will use depending on which one you have out at that time. So if you have your melee weapon out, it'll multiply it by your mods on your melee weapon. If you have your Exalted Blade out, it'll multiply it by whatever is on your Exalted weapon. It just depends what weapon is currently being used. So that's pretty interesting to note. And also, while you are doing slash dash, you are completely invulnerable to any damage. I believe it's just health damage, Correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe it could be health damage or shields damage. It depends on what I figure out after this, but I believe you're just invulnerable, just straight up invulnerable while you're doing your slash dash. So it's pretty cool. And the damage off of this, it's pretty good. It's basically almost a quarter of what you could get with Ash, but then again, you don't have to be looking around the room as with Ash. You have to look around the room to be able to proc everyone. And this, you just press the ability and it'll chain right between opponents. So pretty useful. Radial Howl or Radial Blind. This is something I didn't want to confuse you guys with, but since the Codex is having its own issues, I'm just going to go with Umbral's ability. But as for the usual ability, with you're using Excalibur or the basic Excalibur or Excalibur Prime, not Umbra, they will have both radial blinds. With Umbra, he has his own variant, which is Radial Howl. The only difference between those abilities, Radial Blinds from Excalibur and Excalibur Prime, and Radial Howl, which is from the Umbra, is that the Umbra basically resets any damage absorptions that the Sentience or the Shadow Stalker gets. So that's something that's kind of interesting to note. It's like, hey, the Umbra gets a little bit added extra bonus from this ability because they renamed the ability from Blind to Howl. So for Radial Blind, let out a ferocious howl that stuns nearby enemies and causes Sentience to shred any built-up resistances. Drain is 50 energy, radius is 25 meters. It hits a really good range. It's basically the same thing as Titania's Lantern, I believe. And the duration here is 15 seconds. Now all this does is it just blinds everyone within that 25-meter radius for 15 seconds. And this is really good, especially for Excalibur, because you are just given a prompted finisher. You can just walk up to anybody and do a finisher strike. This finisher strike, as per base, depending on what your level is with your Warframe, can deal from 1 times to a 7 times damage multiplier at level 30 on your Warframe. So dealing 7 times damage when you're in the animation is good, but a thing you got to note, when you are doing any finisher, it takes an animation time and you are only attacking one opponent. So this in and of itself for finishers isn't the greatest because you have to take that animation time. The damage off the finishers though is good because it multiplies any damage that you're dealing by 7 times if you're at full level 30. Now again, there is the difference between the abilities, so we're going to go ahead and visit the basic Excalibur. So, let's see here. So the verbiage is a little bit different here. Radial Blind, emit a bright flash of light. He is radiant, blinding all nearby enemies. So there is that. We do have some issues. I believe this must be unranked, so that must be why the damage is so low. So if you fully rank it, the damage does go from 75 to 250, and the range here as well for the Radial Blind isn't at its full glory, being at 25 meters and the duration being at 16. So there is a little bit different in terms of verbiage here, but it's pretty much the same ability. The only thing you really have to note is for the Umbra that the Howl completely removes any resistances that Sentience or the Stalker build up against you. So that's the only real difference there between the basic and Excalibur Umbra. But since I have the Umbra, I just have to kind of show what abilities the Umbra has regardless, because I don't have the basic Excalibur currently. Radial Javelin. Radial Javelins impale nearby enemies, inflicting a bleed status. Drain is 75 energy, radius is 25 meters. The damage here is 1,000 damage on a base, and what this does also, I believe there is a different description for it, but it basically flings enemies and impales enemies into the walls. So it's really a cool ability. I have to keep on coming back here. I believe there is a difference between the verbiages here. Nope, there's no difference. Never mind that. But the interesting thing to note with this ability is when you're using Radial Javelin, the javelins actually take on a specter form of Excalibur's weapons. So they're basic melee weapons. So if you have the basic Excalibur, you'll see a Skana basically impaling those units. If you have the Prime, or if you have Excalibur Umbra, you will see the Skana Prime doing those impales, or basically being those radial javelins doing that ability. So pretty interesting thing to note. It just changes depending on if you have the Prime, Umbra, or the basic Excalibur. So pretty interesting thing to note. It is a pretty useful ability, not as useful as some others, but with the augment it is going to be pretty useful. The radial howl is a really good one though for the blind and the finisher damage. Exalted Blade. Summon a sword of pure light and immense power. Drain is 25 energy. When you pull this blade out, it'll cost you 25 energy, and the drain per second to be able to use the blade, as this is a magical type weapon, it is 2.5 energy per second. The damage on a base for the blade and for any of its emissions that it throws out in front of itself is 250 base damage. It has a blind radius and a blind duration. If you do a slide attack where you slide and then you attack, it will deal a blind in its vicinity. It'll do a 5-meter radius blind, and the blind duration for this is 6 seconds on a base. This is actually pretty bad. I don't know why this ability even has on a base a slide where it just blinds people. Also, the thing to note when you're doing this, it also drains 25 energy on a base. So this is just straight up awful. Your radial howl or your radial blind has a range of 25 meters. Keep into note, that's 25 meters with a duration of 15 seconds. You already have a blind on this Warframe. Why are we adding a subsequent blind on a slide that has 5-meter radius, 6 blind duration, and it costs 25 energy when you already have an ability that hits the entire field with a blind? They could have actually done something a lot more significant with having a slide attack, and I kind of feel like they threw that out of the way and down the toilet, because this could be a lot better than just having a blind on it. And the blind in and of itself, having the energy cost per slide, is just annoying when you don't even mean to use it and you just want to be able to just use the blade as an AoE attack on a slide, which is what a slide attack is supposed to be doing, and it does this radial blind, draining you 25 energy. So again, very annoying that this does what it does. But yeah, I just find that slide very, very much a waste of the ability. Just it doesn't make sense. It doesn't. You already have a blind. I don't know why they did that. So for this, how do you actually mod the damage, and how is the damage actually displaced? There is no combo multiplier as with slash dash. When you use slash dash, the more combo multiplier that you have, it adds a quarter damage growing. With Exalted Blade, there is no combo multiplier. All it does is take, I believe, your base mods, whatever is on your Exalted Umbra Blade, and that's how the ability is based upon, alongside your power strength. So there's no real combo multiplier here. I wish it was a little bit more interesting, but it really isn't. It's just kind of like lackluster, you know? That's pretty much all I can say about that. Let's go ahead and take a look into modding.
All right.
All right. So yeah, I will go over a little bit more in detail, into depth, on the differences between Excalibur, Excalibur Umbra, and Excalibur Prime. As per any other Warframe, there is a primed variant, but I'm also going to go over kind of Umbra, because there is a little bit more to go over there than any regular Warframe. So for the upgrade path, we are just basically looking at any basic Warframe. We're going to be adding on Steel Charge, as adding melee damage to this frame, as he does a lot of just melee damage. This is a really good mod for him and for any Warframe in the entire game. Prime Sure-Footed, if you haven't seen the Trinity video already, go ahead and rewatch that. It's just nice not to get knocked down when you're knocked down, and to stay on your feet at all times. Arcane Guardian for basically adding 75% damage reduction. This is really good, alongside Arcane Energize to replenish your energy whenever you're low. And if you haven't noticed the mod setup, if you have seen Rhino, this is pretty much the same build. This is really interesting. Why is that? Well, let's jump into the build. We have Umbral Intensify for adding ability strength. This is really good, as we are just adding a whole bunch of ability strength. Not much to go here for the build. We're just basically looking for as much damage as we can put onto Exalted Blade. And with Slash Dash, this is pretty good as well, making sure that our combo counter doesn't go down. But it depends on just kind of what ability you're going to be using, as all of these abilities are pretty useful even on their base. Even without a combo counter or a combo multiplier on the Exalted Blade, this is still a pretty useful ability, especially even at its current state. So Umbral Intensify to up the power strength, Umbral Vitality for more health, and Umbral Fiber to give yourself some damage reduction. There is an immunity on Slash Dash, but don't rely on this for your full damage negation, because it's only one ability and he has no other resistances other than this. So adding Umbral Fiber, as on the base he has 315 armor, adds quite a bit of armor. It basically adds another 600 armor. So that's pretty good to be adding on Umbral Fiber at this point in time. And as these are all part of a set mod, these each increase each other's stats. Umbral Intensify going from 44, adding 11 as soon as you put on another of the set mod. And then when it gets the third set mod, it adds another 22%, going from 44%, 55% to 77% at max when all three mods are equipped. And Umbral Vitality, just like Umbral Fiber, going from 100% to 130 to 180 as soon as you add on all three mods. So these are very good as they pair with each other, and Umbral Intensify gets a whole bunch of power strength without negating other things from it. Now, Transient Fortitude, we do not want to be using this here because it's negative ability duration. This is pretty bad, especially when you're taking into account Exalted Blade. You want to keep this as efficient as possible while getting your damage up as much as you can. So this isn't as good as something like Blind Rage, where we're added 99% ability strength while taking out some of our ability efficiency. This works very well even when you're thinking about Rhino, because you can take out some of that negative ability efficiency, and as long as you're adding some duration, the actual cost of the ability drain per second goes down significantly. Now, we don't need to make this super efficient, as Excalibur has pretty good energy on a base, and most of the time you are getting a lot of energy back via Arcane Energize, so we are keeping up our energy sufficiently enough so that we're also dealing quite a bit of damage on the side. So we don't really need to go full efficiency for this. We can go more so on power strength, as via Rhino. Rhino adds quite a bit of power strength here as well without being too efficient or too semi-efficient. This does help though, having primed continuancy, just to make sure that the drain per second is lower alongside Streamline. If you are going to go Fleeting Expertise, this doesn't do anything. It'll go from 2.02 to 2.5 because you're actually taking out the duration. And even at lower levels of that Fleeting Expertise, it'll still be at 2.5. So we really want to be adding on Streamline just for a positive benefit to negate some of that ability drain. Where did my Streamline go? There we go. Nope, it removed it from the mod category altogether. It does do that sometimes. If you de-equip a mod, it'll completely remove it from the entire list, and you have to reload the modding program so that it can go, oh, I actually have Streamline here. So yeah, it's pretty interesting, but you will negate some of that ability efficiency. And even though you're going to be 25% negative, It's actually pretty good because you're getting so much ability strength, adding on so much damage to your Exalted Blade. We are using also Prime Flow for maximum battery, so we just don't run out of energy overall, and if we do get zapped, we can pretty much keep up our abilities almost at all times. We will be adding on Furious Javelin. Radial Javelin augment. Each enemy hit within the zone. Remember, this thing has 25 meters. This is a pretty big range, so you're going to be able to hit at least 10 opponents within the range. This adds quite significantly. Something like Rhino's Ironclad Charge only hits in a direct line, so it's kind of harder to get a whole group of enemies hit with the ability. This, having 25 meters across the range, hits quite a few different opponents, and each enemy will increase Excalibur's melee damage by 15% for 16 seconds. Now you can see why we add primed continuancy, because we're going to keep that duration up from 16 seconds to 24 seconds every second. So that added 8 seconds is quite useful, because then we're not going to have to reproc the ability every 16 seconds. Instead, we're going to do it every 25 seconds effectively, making it so that it just lasts overall longer. And that is nice, because that's nice and consistent rather than just having the ability run out. Alongside also getting your efficiency up. Now, there are other mods you can use for chroma. Some people do use Chromatic Blade. Some people do use Radiant Finish, and also Purging Slash and Surging Dash. Now, I'm going to go over each one and its positives and negatives. Purging Slash. Allies in the path of slash dash have 4 debuffs removed and 70% shields restored. He is not a support Warframe. This is not as good as it seems. 4 debuffs removed. You could almost have at that point Titania with her first ability, and it'll just completely cleanse any debuffs, and it'll make you immune for a full 16 seconds. He is not a support Warframe. We're not going to play him as such, because this just isn't as good as an augment. Surging Dash, this is for your slash dash. Remember, this also goes off of combo counter. For the slash dash augment, each enemy hit during slash dash further increases your melee combo counter by 8. I completely ignore this, because if you have Niramoron, you will never lose your combo counter. You will always have your combo counter up to your maximum amount. You do not need Surging Dash to get your ability up, because if you have Namaron, it'll always stay at its maximum. So for this, I kind of go, yeah, but meh, because it's not as good. As you've seen with Ashe, Ashe's augment increases the melee counter by 4, and then it adds an additional 10 seconds to your combo multiplier, making it so that your combo multiplier never goes down as often, because the combo multiplier, as soon as those 5 seconds elapse, you'll lose some of that or all of that combo counter. With this, it doesn't add any time. It just adds, each hit adds the combo counter by 8. So if it falls off permanently. And this is why I say just use Namaron, because Namaron will just keep your combo counter up all the time, and it's just overall very, very useful. Also, thing to note about Exalted Blade, every hit by the emissive that comes off that blade does not also count for your combo counter. So again, that's just kind of like, really? Because the emissive should almost be counted as part of the combo counter, but it's just not, for whatever reasons they have for that. Radiant Finish. This is a very good augment. Alongside Furious Javelin, this is also a very good augment because of Radial Blind. As soon as you blind those enemies, you get that finisher damage multiplier. Furious Javelin has to hit at least 20 units across the board to get the same damage as Radiant Finish. Radiant Finish can hit up to 1.5 million in terms of damage straight up on hit. This is really, really good. When you're looking at something like Furious Javelin, it is more so for just constantly being able to pump out damage via the Exalted Blade, and you have to hit quite a few different opponents to be able to get the damage up that far. But Radiant Finish gets it up all the way. But a thing to note that I do not like is having to be in an animation all the time. just to kill one unit. I'd rather have something consistent across the board that deals damage constantly than having to do a finisher for every single opponent. That would take a long time to kill a room full of enemies when I can just use my Furious Javelin. And also Furious Javelin applies to slash dash, upping its damage as well. When you're looking at Radiant Finish, slash dash is not a finisher, I do not believe. So it does not apply Furious Javelin or Radiant Finishes damage. It does apply Furious Javelins. Chromatic Blade. This is one that you might think, oh, this is good. Well, if you're using heat, I would say if you're using heat specifically, this would be good. This would pretty much stack your heat damage indefinitely, and your heat damage would do a lot of damage. But when you're talking about in terms of conditioned overload, this does not do as much damage. And especially when you're looking at modifying your Exalted Blade, your main mod for your ability is going to be Toxin. So if you're going to go about doing heat, I would suggest doing heat with Corrosive. Corrosive would strip 80% of their armor, and then heat on top of that would strip another 50%. So the additive would be 90% of their armor stripped. So that would be pretty good. But again, you've got other Warframes that can straight up just strip armor. So I really wouldn't use it, especially too with Chromatic Blade. Condition Overload is per proc of different status effects affecting the target. When you're using this, it takes all your slash procs, impact, and puncture and throws it out the window and just gives you one status effect. In this case, you could go heat. But then you're losing those 80%, basically going all the way up to 240% bonus damage from Condition Overload. So you're losing a lot of that damage. Yeah, this does do a lot better with heat and of course Corrosive, just to strip armor if you're going solo. But if you have a team or a squad and they can effectively strip that armor off, there is no need for Chromatic Blade to have to strip any of that armor. You're already going to be stripping that armor, and by the way, you're going to be losing damage because of Conditioned Overload. Conditioned Overload is one of those that's really good, especially if you can proc multiple statuses. So this I would not use. If you're going for finishers, this definitely is a better augment mod, but for just consistency across the board, I'm going to be using Furious Javelin because it does up the damage for him quite significantly. And for Exalted Umbra Blade, for modding this one out, you can't really swap out the stance for this, so you will have to be using Exalted Blade, the basically stance for this weapon that just comes alongside this weapon, as if you have seen Valkyr's video on modding out this weapon. This is the type of build that we want to be going for this type of weapon, because Sacrificial Steel gets popped off of Sacrificial Pressure. Nothing too much to note. It's basically the same thing as Valkyr's build. If you go and watch that video, you cannot use Blood Rush and you cannot use Weeping Wounds. So we cannot really use that bonus added critical chance or any of that bonus status chance to be able to pop more statuses to do Conditioned Overload. So we will be basically using the same build as Valkyr for added critical chance, critical or basic damage. Conditioned Overload, every status here adds 80%. So we're looking at 240 plus another 160. So we're looking at a positive bonus of 400% bonus damage coming from Conditioned Overload, because we have 5 different statuses getting procced here if our statuses actually get pulled off, which the Emissive Blade has infinite punch through. So it'll go through everything and it'll have a 33% chance to add a status onto all those enemies. So that's really good, especially if all the enemies are down a hallway, because we'll end up hitting all those enemies. And especially for the status proc, we'll be dealing quite a bit of damage. Primed Fury for your added attack speed, Volcanic Edge, and Volcanic Strike. We do not have Weeping Wounds, so we will try to get that status up as best as we can to get to that 33%. Organ Shatter, this is really good for the critical damage modifier. Even if it's at 2, Organ Shatter adds another 180% times multiplied damage. This is really, really a good mod. And Prime Fever Strike as across the board, this just adds 165 times damage. This is really a good one, especially against Corpus, where you just completely ignore those shields and go, hey, I want your health bar, and they cannot refuse you. It'll just go straight through those shields. So this is really, really good. So differences between Excalibur, Excalibur Umbra, and Excalibur Prime. All right, ready?
I'm ready.
Okay, so the differences between these three different frames is, as we've already stated, with Radial Howl. Radial Howl is different than Radial Blind. It'll basically stop the sentience from gaining any damage reduction from you. So there is that. There's that one difference. Not too much there, but it is kind of interesting that the Prime doesn't have anything for this. Kind of lackluster there that the Umbra gets it, but then you look at the basic Excalibur Prime and he doesn't get it. So that's one of the differences. The second difference, as we've already pointed out already from Radial Javelin, is that from the non-Prime version of Excalibur, he'll just impale people with the basic Skana. And then when you look at the Umbra or even the primed variant of Excalibur, they'll hit with the Skana Prime. So that's a difference there. And then when you're looking at the Exalted Blade, each of the forms of Excalibur has a different looking Exalted Blade. The basic Excalibur has the basic Skana for the handle. The Umbra has his own variant. I believe it's based upon the Sky Jati. I believe it's based upon this weapon's hilt. I'm not sure if that is what it is, but it just has a different appearance than the basic Skana or the Skana Prime. And when you're looking at Excalibur Prime, he wields the Skana Prime, which is basically looks like a fin blade. It basically has that fin blade appearance. I love mentioning that, but it has its own look than the other Exalted Blades. So there's three different types of Exalted Blades. They're very complicated because there are three different types of Warframes: Excalibur, Excalibur Prime, and Excalibur Umbra. The other differences are pretty obvious. The Prime variant of Excalibur, if you're walking up to Death Orbs, he will pop those Death Orbs and he will get energy back. When you're looking at the Umbra or the basic variant of Excalibur, they do not get energy from Death Orbs. Also, the basic stats with the basic stats from the base Excalibur, the stats change from their base. I'll just have to read them off here. For the Prime or the Umbra, they get higher armor, which is 315 from 240 from the base Excalibur, and they get higher energy maximum from 100 and 150 from the basic Excalibur to 175 to 225. This is the same thing for all primes across the board. They just get different varying basic stats. But the interesting thing to note here is that Excalibur Umbra shares the same stats as Excalibur Prime. This is really annoying because Excalibur Umbra should not be the same thing as Excalibur Prime. If we go back into the history of Excalibur Umbra was brought into the Chinese version or build of the game as being its own unique Chinese variant. It has its own kind of look just for the Chinese platform over there. When they brought it into the US, it basically was the same thing as Excalibur and still is the same thing as Excalibur Prime, but it just has a different look. That's all it is. It's just a skin. It's just a cosmetic. When you're looking at it as replacing Excalibur Prime, I completely don't like that idea. The idea that Excalibur Prime is unique kind of still stands to that point, and Excalibur Umbra's base stats should not reflect the primed variant of the frame. So I believe here, for me, if it were me, I would completely nerf the armor and the energy on that behalf, making Excalibur Prime being in its prime, being the better frame. I would not have Excalibur Umbra on a base share the same stats as the primed variant. Excalibur Umbra should just be a worse version of the prime version. So they're, again, just adding more stats from the base, as every Warframe does. There is some significant things to note. So when you're looking at the blades from Excalibur, Excalibur Umbra, and Excalibur Prime, there is significant differences with their basic weapon. So the weapons that they are released with is Excalibur has the Skana, obviously. The Excalibur Prime has the Skana Prime, which is its own weapon, not just the ultimate, but it's also the weapon as well. This weapon for the Skana Prime is a very good weapon. It has the best of all the swords critical multiplier, and I believe it has a very good critical chance. I don't think it's the best. I think there are some weapons that do have a higher critical chance, but it has very good stats across the board, making it be the actual top weapon in terms of actual damage output. It has the best damage output across the board. It has that high critical multiplier and the high base damage, which makes it just have the highest damage output of all the other weapons. Then when you come across the Excalibur Umbra, they come out, of course, with that weird weapon that we just mentioned earlier, the Sky Ajati. Sky Ajati. I don't know how you say that, but the weird thing is this weapon has awful critical chance, has awful status, and has awful critical multiplier. The critical multiplier on the Skana Prime is at a 2.6 times, which is pretty significant. It's pretty good for a basic melee type weapon. But when you're looking at this weapon, when you do a finisher with it, you go invisible, which I didn't know, for a full 5 seconds. And the Skana Prime does none of that. And I'm just kind of thinking, why doesn't the Skana Prime get about the same, lore or luster than the Skajani? That doesn't make any sense. So again, for that, I kind of wish the Skana Prime had some unique effect, And talking about unique effects, I think the most unique effect that I've seen so far is actually Frost. When you're using his Ice Wave, you get those little golden duckies that come off of the emissive of the ability.
I love that.
Yeah. And I kind of wish for the same reverence or respect that you get for Frost's abilities from Excalibur Prime. And I don't know, but having a Radial Howl and not having any other variant for Excalibur Prime, if that's the case, where he doesn't have that upgraded ability or something with as visual finesse or basically visual appearance as Frost's Ice Wave, then what's the real significance of the Prime if it doesn't have the significance built into it? Again, with the base stats, that's just kind of a slap in the face for Excalibur Prime, where he doesn't have that nice buff to the armor, buff to the energy, and Excalibur Umbra just shares the same stat. That's just kind of weird. So that's that. Yeah, I believe that's all the differences between Excalibur the base, Excalibur Prime, and Excalibur Umbra. So to me, especially with the Prime, I would like to see a little bit more in terms of this. With the Exalted Blade, I would like to see a little bit more in terms of, I would have to say different things, but especially when the blade is emissive like this, the blade travels so slow. I wish that, like, if you have any fire rate type weapon, what terminal velocity is. It increases the speed of a projectile. I would almost want on this Exalted Blade terminal velocity, where you can actually up the blade's speed so it feels like in its prime glory. I just really, really want Excalibur to feel like you're a living legend. You just have this blade, it deals a ton of damage, and you are Excalibur. You have basically the legend, the living legend in your hands. And from what I've seen of his abilities, and especially of what I've seen of Excalibur, he is good, but I could say that there is a little bit more so lackluster into the frame. I wish there was a little bit more to just kind of make him shine a little bit more, you know, just kind of make him look good. But yes,
Yeah.
other than that, shall we take him out for a ride?
Yeah.
All right.
Also, you get Excalibur Umbra from the sacrifice mod. Or
From the
quest.
sacrifice.
From the sacrifice quest.
From the sacrifice quest. But we're just talking about the base Excalibur.
Yeah.
The base Excalibur.
Oh, I went past it.
The sacrifice
Yeah.
should be at the very bottom somewhere.
But, nah.
No.
Let's go.
All right.
Keep the enemy busy while a fellow channel operative raids the ship for supplies. Ready?
Okay, yeah, that is very poopy. Because I want energy. Give me energy.
But this is why I state that he shouldn't be the same variant of Prime. He's not. He's not even a Prime. And to buff his base stats to be able to look like the same Prime, no, it's not. Buff his stats a little bit, but not to the point where it's the same as Prime. He is not Prime. Which we can do later how. It blinds people. And you can stun them. And this gives you bonus damage. I absolutely hate, despise, I'd have to say, not hate, hate is a pretty strong word, but I absolutely despise the slide attack. The slide attack could have been done so much better. You've already got this ability which blinds everything, and to just have a secondary blind, to me, just takes away from the actual frame itself. Makes no sense. But other than that, the frame is really good.
Yeah. And Excalibur was my starting Warframe.
Yeah. But you can see how the blades travel, and especially if you're trying to get them down a hallway or trying to attack an opponent across the room. They travel so slow. So this is also something I'd be looking at. Because even if I'm trying to get this unit right here, it takes a while for the blade to get over to where he's at. This is Excalibur we're talking about. This should be Radiance. This should be Glory. This should be the living legend. And it's just not. Yeah, it kind of is, but it is kind of lackluster.
Yeah.
Oh, I hate that. I want to do like a slide attack and have something unique for that slide attack. And every time you do a slide attack, you're just disappointed, you know? Just like, man, seriously?
It's like I would like my energy not taken
Yeah.
when I slide.
Because every time you do that, it takes 25 energy. And it just sucks because you're expecting something better than just the suckiness that it is.
Yeah.
But yeah. I think the thing that I like the most is actually the basic Warframe-Excalibur. And his emissive blade is just, it looks so good. Because it doesn't look like any other blade. It's just a random emissive. Like he pulled out, you know, this blade out of nowhere. It's just this magical blade.
Yeah.
I love that. And then the other ones, they have a physical form to them, and I'm just like, yeah. I like the energy blade, to be honest.
Yeah.
Looks so good.
I do too.
I hate that. Every time I'm like, oh, I'm gonna slide attack, and it's just like disappointment engraven on my face. Just like, oh my goodness, are you kidding me?
Yeah.
Again with the projectiles. Pretty slow. We're gonna stand here for a good hour waiting, as you can just see the blade wave just going out. Slowly gonna get him. Slowly. Is it almost there yet? Okay. Whoa. That's a lag. But yeah, I do love the idea of Excalibur. I just feel like it could be used a little bit more effectively. Should have more finesse.
Finesse.
Should have more to it. Oh yeah, slash dash. I forgot about that.
I normally don't use slash.
Oh yeah, but you go invulnerable, don't you? Right. And that is built off of combo counter. So that is fun. Javelin. Boom. Ooh, pretty much a primed pressure point. We shall go.
We shall.
Yeah.
What?
Oh.
Another job well executed.
All right. So that is Excalibur. Excalibur is a really good one. He's a real fun one just to actually pick up, to be able to play. Very good Warframe across the board. But when you're taking a look at the abilities, and especially if you're taking a look at the Prime Warframe, there's a little bit definitely lacking in terms of the actual abilities, in terms of the actual lore, and just especially with him in general. I can see quite a few different points beyond what I've actually talked about, and I have ideas for that are just kind of lackluster, especially in terms of his general just development. I just wish there's a little bit more put into him where he felt like this living legend in your hands, and you just pick him up and it would just be like, man, he's so good. And instead I kind of pick him up and I go, you kind of cringe every single time that you do that slide, and it just takes away from the frame, where I wish I could just see a lot more. This is such a cool frame, man, he's the legend, you know. And you're just playing Excalibur, and he is such a fun frame. But
Yeah.
again, just some of these things really do stick out like a sore thumb, and we would like to see a little bit more of this legend come to pass. Wow.
Yes.
Well, is that all the time we have for this episode?
Unfortunately, yes.
Yes. And we will see you guys in the very next video. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.